Hello everyone. I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. Story 1. Between 1997 and 2013, a stretch of Highway 29 in Virginia and North Carolina became known as the route of no return. Dozens of women vanished. Some were found brutally murdered. Others were never seen again. The cases were presumed isolated until a discovery in 2014 uncovered a hidden trail of evidence connecting them all. But what if the killer was closer than anyone imagined? What if the person leading the search was orchestrating the nightmare all along? The first time someone called it the route of no return, it was a joke, a bitter one. A beat cop in Danville, Virginia, standing beside a roadside cross for a missing college student, muttered it to a rookie as they watched the girl's mother sob in the breakdown lane of Highway 29. By then, 3 women had vanished in less than 2 years, all within a 75-mile stretch of the rural highway that snaked through Virginia's countryside like a scar. Nobody was ready to admit it was a pattern. Not yet. But that was 1999. By 2013, it wasn't a joke anymore. It was a name whispered in fear, a caution passed from mothers to daughters, a phantom etched into the shoulders of the road. And for the families of the missing, Highway 29 was more than just a dangerous stretch of asphalt. It was a graveyard without tombstones. This is the story of what really happened along that haunted route, and how a cold case from 1997 blew open something far larger, a dark conspiracy that spanned over a decade, hidden in plain sight. The first to vanish, Alicia Navarro, 1997. Alicia Navarro, 19 years old, was a freshman at Piedmont, Virginia Community College. On the night of October 18, 1997, she left a friend's apartment in Lynchburg to drive back to her dorm. The trip should have taken less than 45 minutes. She never made it. Her Toyota Corolla was found 2 days later, pulled off onto the shoulder of Highway 29 near the Otter River Bridge. The doors were locked. Her purse was inside. Her wallet and ID sat neatly on the passenger seat. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no fingerprints. Just a single gas station receipt, time-stamped 9:13 p.m., the last confirmed trace of Alicia Navarro. Detectives searched the surrounding woods for weeks. Helicopters flew overhead. Dive teams dredged the river. Nothing. She was simply gone. The case quickly went cold, shelved under adult voluntary disappearance. The working theory? She left of her own volition, but her parents didn't buy it. Alicia wasn't the kind of girl who ran, her mother, Evelyn Navarro, told reporters. She had plans, a life. She was coming home for Thanksgiving. Nobody believed her, until the second girl vanished. The pattern begins. Lisa Patterson, 1998. Lisa Patterson, 22, was a waitress at a Waffle House just off exit 164. It was an overnight shift on March 12, 1998. She clocked out at 4 a.m., told her manager she was heading home, and got into her car. Like Alicia, she was never seen again. Her car was discovered abandoned 10 miles south, again on Highway 29. The driver's side door was cracked open. Her phone was missing, but her purse and tip money were untouched. Local news ran the story for 2 days before it was pushed off the front page by a house fire and a gubernatorial visit. But then something strange happened. 2 weeks later, a single Polaroid photograph was mailed anonymously to Lisa's parents. In the image, Lisa, gagged, bound at the wrists, sitting in what looked like a shipping container. Behind her, written on the wall in marker, "I saw Alicia." The photo was declared authentic. For the first time, investigators linked the disappearances, but without suspects, physical evidence, or a location. The trail once again went cold. The Highway 29 Task Force, 1999. By the summer of 1999, a third woman had vanished. Deborah Fain, 24, a graduate student at UVA. This time, her car wasn't found for months. It was eventually located hidden in a forested area 3 miles off a gravel turnout from the highway. Inside, investigators found 2 disturbing clues: a pair of women's shoes that didn't belong to Deborah, a second Polaroid, this one showing Deborah and Lisa Patterson seated beside each other, both restrained, both terrified. Written beneath the photo in red ink, 3 in frame. How many more? The FBI was called in. A multi-jurisdictional task force was formed. They dubbed the string of disappearances the Highway 29 corridor cases. Locals began referring to the area as the vanishing line. But even with federal resources, tips dried up. Rumors flourished. A trucker was arrested in 2001, but no evidence tied him to any of the crimes. Another suspect, a parolee living near the river, died by suicide before he could be questioned. His DNA didn't match any samples. Frustrated, demoralized, and increasingly scrutinized by the media, the task force disbanded in 2003. Officially, there were no leads. Unofficially, some investigators believed something much darker was happening. "We weren't looking for one killer," said retired FBI agent Mark Jeffries in a 2020 documentary. "We were looking at a system. Someone was hiding behind process, and we were dancing in circles." The survivor, Sarah, 2005. On July 8, 2005, a woman stumbled into a rural fire station south of Culpeper, barefoot and delirious. She was in her early 20s, covered in bruises, and refused to give her real name. She called herself Sarah. She told authorities she had been abducted by a man who picked her up while hitchhiking near Route 29. He offered her a ride and a bottle of water. She woke up chained to a wall in a soundproofed room. Over the next 9 days, she was beaten, photographed, and drugged. She was forced to pose for the camera, sometimes alone, sometimes with other girls she never saw again. She said the man wore a mask shaped like a camera lens, spoke in riddles, and called himself the curator. Sarah managed to escape by stabbing her captor with a splintered chair leg while he attempted to feed her. She ran for miles through the woods before finding the fire station. Her description of the room, soundproofing, photographic lights, Polaroid cameras, and chains, matched earlier theories about the locations seen in the previous photos. The FBI reactivated the case. They believed Sarah had encountered the killer responsible for at least 6 disappearances linked to the Highway 29 corridor. But when agents returned to the wooded area near where Sarah believed she had been held, they found nothing. No shack, no trace of blood, no Polaroids. It was as if the room had vanished. The curator had covered his tracks. The map nobody noticed. It wasn't until 2014 that the first true break came. In a storage unit auctioned off in Richmond, a man purchased an old box of junk belonging to a deceased government contractor. In the bottom was a crumpled state highway map of Virginia, hand-marked with dozens of red dots. Each dot corresponded to a location on or near Highway 29. 8 of them were exact coordinates where women had vanished. The other 30 were unexplained, until FBI analysts began cross-referencing them with cold case files from surrounding counties. They found a chilling commonality. In every location marked with a red dot, there had been at least one unsolved disappearance of a young woman between 1996 and 2013. Some were never reported publicly. Others had been assumed to be unrelated. A few were still listed as runaways, but they were all within 5 miles of Highway 29. And every one of them, every last name, appeared in the margins of a case file belonging to a single man. The name behind the files. His name was David M. Klein. He wasn't a suspect. Not officially. Not ever. Klein had been a respected forensics liaison for the Virginia State Police from 1996 to 2009. His job? Facilitating interdepartmental data sharing on active missing persons cases. Essentially, he was the guy who linked cases across counties, the central hub of all Highway 29 intel. He was known for his photographic memory and tireless work ethic. He also happened to own a rural cabin 4.3 miles off exit 171, right where Sarah believed she had been held in 2005. Klein died in 2011 of an apparent heart attack. He was cremated. His estate was modest. But when the FBI got a warrant to examine his remaining digital files, they discovered something that would change the case forever. Buried on an encrypted drive was a single folder titled Unexhibited. Inside, 217 Polaroid scans. Women, bound, drugged, crying, all photographed in the same style, same lighting, same framing. Some matched known victims. Others had never been identified. Klein wasn't the sole killer. He was the archivist, the one who curated the collection, cataloged the horror. And he hadn't worked alone. The discovery of David M. Klein's encrypted hard drive sent shockwaves through the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. The folder named Unexhibited was more than just a digital trophy case. It was a blueprint of terror, a macabre journal kept not with words, but with photographs. Each image was dated, time-stamped. Some were labeled with initials, others bore only numbers. But what startled investigators most was the methodical structure. These weren't impulsive crimes. They were carefully planned, systematized, categorized. It was a sickening realization. The man they once praised as a crucial analyst, the forensics liaison who connected departments and flagged cases, had been hiding in plain sight, controlling the narrative, curating the chaos. But Klein wasn't acting alone. The scale was too large, the locations too varied, and the camera angle in many of the photographs too distant, as though someone else had taken the shots. Klein had help, and if he had a partner, or worse, a network, they could still be out there. Breaking down the files, FBI Special Agent Natalie Royce was the first to publicly admit what others were thinking behind closed doors. This wasn't just a serial offender, she said during a private 2015 task force meeting. This was a catalog, a collection. Somebody out there was documenting suffering the way you document museum artifacts. Royce's team painstakingly reconstructed the contents of Klein's drive. The unexhibited folder had 3 subfolders: PRE, containing images of women in parking lots, at gas stations, or walking alone along roadside shoulders. These appeared to be surveillance images, taken without the subject's knowledge. Exhibit, the largest folder. These were the Polaroids already seen by investigators, now scanned and stored digitally. Women photographed in captivity, all clearly drugged or restrained. Void, the smallest folder, but the most disturbing. These images were out of focus, damaged, or corrupted. In one, the frame was black, but for a gloved hand in the corner. Another was a blurry image of someone wearing a mask shaped like a camera lens. This final detail confirmed a chilling theory. The curator persona described by Sarah, the survivor from 2005, was real, and he'd been documented by Klein. Decoding the markings within the metadata of each image file was a string of characters, alphanumeric codes that initially made no sense. Royce's team brought in cryptographers and code breakers. What they found was horrifying in its implication. The strings weren't random. They were coordinates, dates, and catalog references. Decoded, it meant EXB Consters Exhibit 029, Highway 29 JS 1999, victim initials and year of abduction, Jessica Simmons, 1999, C2A3, catalog marker, possibly indicating image number and storage set. This wasn't just someone hoarding trophies. It was a fully indexed record system, like that of a museum or an archive. Klein had kept it all meticulously organized. There was purpose in every image. Royce made a disturbing observation. This wasn't just for Klein. It was for someone else. Someone who expected order. Someone who maybe commissioned it. The word commissioned stuck in the room like a fog. Because if that was true, it meant Klein wasn't just documenting the crimes. He might have been working for someone else. The man behind the mask investigators turned their attention to the figure known as the curator. Sarah's description in 2005 had seemed bizarre at the time. An abductor who dressed like a walking camera, quoting museum terms, whispering about exhibits. She described his movements as deliberate, as though he was performing. No fingerprints, no facial ID, not even a consistent voice. But now, with the photographic evidence in Klein's folders, her story had horrifying corroboration. A deeper analysis of one blurry photo in the void folder showed something curious. A faint background reflection, enough to pull license plate numbers off a vehicle seen parked outside a gas station in the distance. The car was registered to a man named Graham Klein, no relation to David Klein. Graham Klein was a former museum exhibits designer. He'd worked in D.C., Baltimore, and eventually Charlottesville, where he quietly ran a now-defunct boutique gallery called the Assemblage Room. The gallery had closed in 2004 under murky financial circumstances. Records showed it once hosted an underground collection that had mysteriously vanished before an IRS audit. No known address, no public online presence, a ghost. Until that license plate tied him to the background of a photo featuring a woman who'd vanished in 2003. It wasn't conclusive proof, but it was enough for a warrant. The raid, a house of frames. On October 9, 2015, the FBI raided Graham Klein's last known address, a 3-story Victorian house on the outskirts of Louisa County. Overgrown, isolated, and partially boarded up, the house had been long abandoned. Or so they thought. Inside, agents found what one report described as a museum of the grotesque. A room filled with hanging picture frames, empty but tagged with names. Mannequins dressed in second-hand clothing, each labeled with initials matching known victims. Shelves stacked with analog camcorders, old Polaroid cameras, and lenses. A false wall concealing a trapdoor. Below that, a basement studio. And that's where they found it. A soundproofed chamber, with studio lights, white walls, steel chair bolted to the floor, chains, gag props, tripod mounts, and in the corner, sealed in plastic bins, over 400 undeveloped Polaroid films. Many were degraded, but the FBI lab was able to recover images from 162 of them. Half had never been seen before. The collector's manifesto, taped to the wall in the basement, was a laminated sheet of paper bearing a single phrase: "The human scream is the truest form of authenticity." Beneath it, in neat cursive, "Curation demands clarity." There was no sign of Graham Klein himself. No fingerprints, no DNA, no personal effects. Just his gallery of shadows. Agents scoured the property for months. They dug up the backyard, ran luminol tests in every room, scanned for signs of decomposition. Nothing. But buried in the crawl space was a safe. Inside, a flash drive, password protected. After weeks of brute force attempts, forensic analysts cracked the code UNX-CH13-MARKER. When opened, the flash drive revealed text files, journals, not from David Klein, but from someone else. A different voice, more poetic, more philosophical. They referred to the project as the collection and made frequent mention of patrons. "We exhibit only the most complete fear. The collection is not for the many. It is for the few who understand, who fund understanding." Klein was efficient, but sloppy. He saw the archive as a safety net. I see it as a temple, It was a manifesto, one that made a chilling claim. There are 13 total curators, each with their own medium. Highway 29 is but one corridor. A wider conspiracy? The word patrons appeared 26 times in the recovered files. In some entries, it was plural. In others, it was singular, the patron. This led investigators to explore a terrifying possibility. Was there an organized network behind the Highway 29 disappearances? Not just multiple killers, but an infrastructure, a supply chain of abduction, documentation, and delivery. And if so, delivery to whom? The unsettling theory gained traction when one entry described a shipment. Shipment prepared for Patron 4A via Northeast Corridor. 5 exhibitions. Well documented. This didn't sound like random acts of violence. It sounded like human trafficking on an industrial scale, with a grotesque veneer of artistic justification. And the more they dug, the worse it got. Financial records linked to a defunct LLC once associated with the assemblage room showed overseas wire transfers to shell companies in Amsterdam, Singapore, and the Cayman Islands. In total, over $2.3 million had passed through the account between 2001 and 2008. Funding what? There was no trail of inventory, no products. Just one recurring memo line: curation services. The 13 curators theory. The FBI launched a classified inquiry based on the manifesto's claim that there were 13 curators, each with a medium. Highway 29 was labeled C7 Americana. Other designations appeared: C1, Nordic Silence; C4, Tokyo Mirage; C9, Zealots Bay; C13, Final Frame. None of the other corridors could be definitively tied to real-world locations, yet. But cyber analysts working with Interpol noted overlapping patterns in unsolved disappearances that matched some of the designations. Could there be 12 other routes like Highway 29 around the world? And were each of them being maintained by a different curator? No one had answers, and no one dared ask the obvious question: who are the patrons? The names in the frames. Back in the abandoned house, every empty frame on the wall had a brass plate with a name. FBI agents began cataloging them, cross-referencing with national databases. Over 60 of the names matched known missing persons cases. 6 of them hadn't yet been reported missing at all. Their families had assumed they ran away. 4 were found alive, but refused to speak. One woman, rescued from a human trafficking raid in New Mexico in 2016, was shown one of the frames. Her reaction was immediate. "That was my name. That's what he called me. He said when I was ready to scream the right way, he'd frame me forever." She never said another word. By the end of 2015, the FBI had reached a chilling conclusion. The Highway 29 disappearances were part of something far bigger than one man or one route. The evidence recovered from David Klein's files and the Louisa County house painted a picture of a network, a decentralized, cult-like web of predators operating under a shared ideology, masked behind the language of curation and art. But if Highway 29 was merely one corridor, how many others were there? And where? That's when the name Corridor C1 surfaced again, this time in an Interpol file tied to a cold case nearly 4,000 miles away in Norway. Nordic Silence, Oslo, 2002. In the spring of 2002, a 19-year-old college student named Astrid Nystrom vanished after leaving a student art exhibit in Oslo. Her last known location was a tram stop a few blocks from the gallery. At the time, Norwegian authorities suspected suicide or voluntary disappearance. No evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle, just a missing girl, lost in a sea of presumed mental illness. But when Interpol reviewed Graham Klein's manifesto, specifically the mention of C1 Nordic Silence, they found something disturbing. Astrid's case file had been viewed in 2003 by a foreign forensic analyst on a U.S. Department of Justice server. The viewer's name? David Klein. Klein had accessed international databases on multiple occasions under the guise of comparative profiling. But Astrid's case had no relevance to any known U.S. criminal investigations. Why was he looking at her? And more importantly, how did he even know about her disappearance? The gallery thread Interpol dug deeper and found a pattern. 3 more disappearances in Northern Europe between 2000 and 2005, all women between 18 and 25, all last seen in or near small art galleries or cultural exhibitions. In one case, a Czech woman vanished after responding to a Craigslist-style ad for a photography model in Berlin. In every case, the gallery or studio went dark within weeks of the abduction. Ownership documents were murky, with ties to shell companies or cash-only lease agreements. No bodies were ever found. It wasn't definitive, but it smelled the same. A pattern that echoed Highway 29, only colder, quieter, more efficient. If Highway 29 was about overt capture and psychological terror, Corridor C1 was about disappearance, erasure, silence. Interpol gave the cases a code name, Operation Iceframe. They reopened the investigation with one unifying theory. The curators were real, and they weren't bound by borders. Digital ghosts. Meanwhile, back in Virginia, Agent Natalie Royce's team continued to pore over the Klein files. With every recovered photo, they hoped to identify victims or uncover new leads. But one set of images caught Royce's attention, a sequence dated 2008. It featured a woman with striking red hair, photographed in various stages of consciousness, inside what appeared to be a minimalist concrete room. The timestamp indicated the photos were taken after Klein's death. How was that possible? Either the timestamp was faked, or someone else had uploaded the image posthumously using Klein's archive system. Metadata analysis revealed the latter. The image had been added in 2010 from an IP address routed through Reykjavik, Iceland. Interpol was immediately alerted. Icelandic authorities began a quiet sweep of hotels, storage units, and art spaces rented by Americans between 2009 and 2011. A list of 76 names was narrowed to one, Julian Marks, a former video installation artist from Baltimore who had relocated to Iceland after declaring bankruptcy. He'd given an interview to a small Reykjavik arts magazine in 2009, where he described his latest work as a living exhibit about the intersection of breath and stillness, the tension of presence and absence. He also said something else, something that sent chills through investigators. The human body is the most honest canvas. You just have to be quiet enough to hear its screams. The interview had been published under a pseudonym, but the voice on the accompanying podcast was unmistakably his, the whisper of the patron. It was during this same period that a whistleblower inside a major European telecom provider came forward. He'd been monitoring encrypted VoIP traffic flagged by the French government's anti-trafficking division. One call in particular had raised alarms. It was a conversation between two parties, one in Austria, the other believed to be in the US. The topic? Shipment preparation for the C1 series. The most jarring part wasn't the content. It was the tone. Calm, formal, almost academic. They weren't discussing people. They were discussing pieces. 3 are ready for cold frame. The Oslo one is complete. Frame the final properly. Send previews. The patron wants authenticity. The patron. The name kept coming up. And in the context of these calls, it was clear. The patron wasn't an idea. It was a person, a customer, a financier, the one for whom the curators worked. But who was the patron? A black market collector? A billionaire with twisted desires? A faceless entity that commissioned horrors like others might commission art? Interpol, the FBI and Europol began joint efforts to trace the patron. Wire transfers, shell accounts, cryptocurrency wallets. They all led nowhere, until someone noticed a small but telling detail. In several of the recovered Klein images, the lower right-hand corner of the photograph bore a raised seal, barely visible unless tilted under light. It was a monogram. PG, the gallery in the Alps. In early 2016, a tip from an art appraiser in Zurich finally cracked the silence. He claimed to have seen a private collection unlike anything he'd encountered before, housed in a secluded villa near Innsbruck, Austria. The owner? A recluse known only as PG. He was said to be a collector of extreme performance art. His villa, rumored among Europe's elite to house one-of-a-kind installations, was off-limits to anyone but hand-picked guests. The appraiser had seen only a fraction, enough to know that something was deeply wrong. He described a room lined with frames, each empty, or so it seemed, until light hit at just the right angle, revealing glass slides embedded with ultra-high-resolution photographs of women in distress, confined spaces, masks, restraints, each labeled with a simple number and a corridor designation, C7, C1, C4. Interpol assembled a task force, but by the time they reached the villa, it had been stripped. The rooms were empty, the glass slides gone, the security system offline, no sign of PG. Only a note, typed and left on a minimalist pedestal in the center of the gallery space. Art cannot be seized, only observed. The lie of closure. Back in Virginia, Natalie Royce was left to make the hardest call of her career. Do they release what they've found? Tell the public about the curators, the corridors, the patron, or keep it buried to prevent mass panic? She argued for transparency, but the Justice Department disagreed. The official statement released in March 2016 was simple. We have concluded a major operation targeting individuals tied to the Highway 29 disappearances. While we continue to pursue leads internationally, there is no evidence of a larger organized network. It was a lie. Royce knew it. Her team knew it. And the families of the victims? They felt it. One by one, they began to push back, speak out, appear on podcasts, launch documentaries, each asking the same haunting question. Why did they need to lie to us? The hidden victims. In July 2016, a group of journalists from ProPublica published a bombshell exposé based on leaked FBI documents. The report revealed that at least 43 women featured in the unexhibited folder had never been classified as missing persons. Some were from vulnerable communities. Others were recent immigrants. A few had even been listed in criminal databases as vagrants or suspects. The system had failed them completely. And for that failure, the curators had thrived. They picked their victims carefully, not just for opportunity, but for silence, for invisibility. These women didn't vanish, the article read. They were selected. And that's when it became clear. Highway 29 was never the hunting ground. It was the gallery hallway, the corridor that led to the unseen exhibits. The highway hadn't swallowed them whole. Someone had framed them there and moved them beyond, into the vanishing line. By late 2016, a grassroots movement began to take shape online. Victim advocates, independent investigators, and digital sleuths began mapping out the curator's potential corridors. They started calling it the vanishing line, a red thread stretching across the world, from remote highways in Virginia to desolate backstreets in Tokyo to the fog-choked galleries of Vienna. No one knew how many victims there were. No one knew if the patron was one person or many. But everyone agreed on one thing. This wasn't over. The vanishing line was still growing, and somewhere, in the silence of a frame yet to be filled, a new exhibit waited. If the patron was the curator's heartbeat, Then the one called the archivist was its memory, an invisible figure who catalogued horrors with precision and perhaps more chillingly, a sense of purpose. Long before authorities gave him a name, investigators across 4 countries had already started whispering about a phantom who left fingerprints without ever touching anything. They never had a photograph. They never had a real name, but they had a signature. Each time law enforcement recovered a folder, a server, or a trove of materials linked to Klein or his circle, they found a pattern in the metadata. A username embedded into encryption keys. An invisible watermark burned into each video's hash. Mnemosyne, it was an ancient reference. Mnemosyne, the Greek goddess of memory and mother of the muses. Fitting for someone who turned tragedy into a digital museum. The Berlin drop. In October 2016, a USB drive was anonymously mailed to the offices of a Berlin-based investigative journalist named Carla Frey, who had been covering the growing scandal around the European end of the vanishing line. No return address. Postmarked from Prague. It was labeled simply, "For memory." Inside were 76 folders, each labeled with a corridor code and year. C1 through C9, spanning 1997 to 2015. The contents? Hundreds of images, both digital and scanned Polaroids. Dozens of short video clips, mostly silent, some lasting only seconds. Excel files with cryptic inventory-style notes. Height, weight, condition, behavioral notes, and a final column titled State. The entries under this last field ranged from active to framed to disposed. It was evidence on a scale no task force had ever managed to piece together on its own. But the most haunting discovery came in the final folder. It contained a single audio file, just 1 minute and 27 seconds long. A female voice, shaky but determined, whispering, "If someone's listening, my name is Lucy Halber. I was taken from a gallery in Krakow in 2011. I've seen 8 others. Please, please don't forget us. Please remember, please remember." Lucy Halber had never been reported missing. In fact, she was still listed as alive, living in Warsaw under her maiden name, working as a photographer. Authorities tracked her down within 48 hours. But when they arrived, the apartment was empty, and the woman who answered the door claimed she'd never heard of Lucy Halber. She said her name was Anya Drews. She looked nothing like the woman in the audio. DNA tests from the glass she drank from were inconclusive. Interpol later confirmed the real Lucy Halber had vanished in 2011. The photo of her in the missing gallery ad had been doctored with AI-based facial smoothing. Someone had gone to great lengths to preserve the illusion that she was never missing at all. Another curated absence. Digital autopsy. The USB drive's metadata offered few leads, until cybersecurity expert Dr. Adesh Rahman, working with the UK's National Crime Agency, discovered a pattern hidden within the file creation timestamps. Each folder's creation time corresponded not to a date or time, but to prime numbers. The minute field, the second field, even the nanoseconds, all were prime. That meant someone had manually altered each timestamp. Why? Rahman's team theorized it was a form of steganography, concealed data embedded within innocuous metadata, and they were right. Each folder's time sequence formed a code. When decrypted, they spelled out a single phrase in Latin: Memoria est immortalitas. Memory is immortality. Whoever Mnemosyne was, they weren't just documenting the vanishing line. They believed they were preserving it, enshrining it. The archivist's letter. A month after the USB surfaced in Berlin, Carla Frey received a second envelope. This one was hand-delivered by a courier. Inside, a typewritten letter, unsigned. 1 paragraph. You cannot understand the curators until you understand their audience. I was not one of them. I was their librarian, their scribe. The patron demanded record, demanded beauty preserved beyond the moment of breath. Do not seek me. I have already archived myself. It was the first direct communication believed to be from the archivist. Intelligence analysts studied the language. They believed the writer was educated, possibly from a literary or archival background. The use of the phrase "archived myself" intrigued them. Could it mean suicide? Or retreat into deep anonymity? Interpol flagged the letters stationary, a rare linen blend only sold in one store in Geneva. Surveillance footage showed a figure in a long coat, face obscured, leaving the shop 2 days before the courier made the delivery. Whoever they were, they knew how to vanish better than their subjects. The broken curator. In a stroke of unexpected fortune, Royce's task force finally caught a break. Not through forensics or surveillance, but through ego. In February 2017, a man using the alias Lyle Morse began posting on an encrypted art critique forum called Obscuranet. Most of his posts were esoteric discussions of avant-garde body installations. But one post caught attention. It was titled, "The Patron Betrayed Us." In it, Morse lamented that the vision of corridor work had been distorted by commerce, and that authentic exhibits were now reduced to PDFs and podcasts. The tone was bitter, almost nostalgic. Using linguistic profiling and cross-referencing Obscuranet login times with IP masks, investigators traced Morse to a defunct shipping container residence outside of Montreal. Inside, they found Lyle Morse, real name Silas Green, an installation artist once affiliated with a radical art collective known as the Sublimists. He didn't resist arrest. He didn't say much. But when presented with a photo of a Corridor C7 victim found in a frame dated 2004, he whispered one thing. She wasn't supposed to be kept. She was just a study. Over weeks of interrogation, Green revealed key details about the hierarchy. Each corridor had a lead curator. The patron rarely communicated directly. He used the archivist as an intermediary. The goal was not death per se, but preservation of a state between terror and acceptance. He also described a facility, a white cube in the woods, used for staging and photography. Location unknown. Most of his information was maddeningly vague, but he did drop one useful name. You want to find the archivist? Look for the man who never logged off, the janitor. The janitor protocol. Every large operation has its cleanup crew. In the Vanishing Line network, they had what Green called the janitor, a digital ghost responsible for wiping traces, rerouting IPs, replacing images with innocuous placeholders, and maintaining backup caches in dark web repositories. Essentially, the archivist's technician. Green didn't know his real name, but he remembered a username, /Echo7. That was all Royce's team needed. With the help of the NSA, they launched Operation Backdoor, a sweeping probe across data centers suspected of hosting black market galleries. In a Finland-based server used for hosting illicit image boards, they finally found /Echo7's signature, a custom timestamp modification tool called Afterlight. Inside the tool's code was a single comment left by its author. The frame is only complete once the light fades. A poetic clue, but also a literal one. Using that as a hash seed, cyber forensics discovered a hidden partition on a backup server containing archival footage, raw, time-stamped, and clearly from the curator's original sessions, not publicly distributed. Some scenes were over a decade old. One, labeled C3PG78, showed a room with white walls and a woman sitting silently in the corner. The camera zoomed in slowly, and just before the frame cut to black, a reflection could be seen in the polished concrete. A man, holding a camera. And for the first time, law enforcement had a possible image of the archivist, blurred, partial, distorted by reflection, but enough to work from. The patron unveiled? As the investigation deepened, one name emerged from behind the initials PG, a name buried beneath years of shell companies and financial proxies: Pierre Gauthier. A French art philanthropist and rare collector, known in the private art world for acquiring controversial works banned from public display. Gauthier had once been suspected of financing illegal performance pieces in the 1990s, but had never been charged. He lived between Monaco and Montenegro, and had disappeared entirely from public view after 2014. Interpol issued a quiet red notice, but Gauthier, if he was truly the patron, had vanished, perhaps permanently, perhaps not. The curators had always moved like shadows, and now, so did he. The archivist's final frame. In August 2017, a final USB drive was left at the gates of the FBI headquarters in Quantico. It contained one file, a photograph, not of a victim, but of a mirror. In the reflection, the same man from the Finland footage. Only this time, his face was clear. And behind him, painted on the wall in smeared red paint, were the words, "I have archived myself." No other data, no metadata, no location clues, just the image. To this day, the man in the mirror remains unidentified. But one thing is certain. The archivist, like the curators, knew his art, and he knew when it was time to become part of the gallery. By early 2018, the investigation had fractured across jurisdictions and continents. Dozens of task forces operated in parallel, each chasing shadows, each hoping their piece of the puzzle might reveal the whole. But none of them expected the next major lead to come not from intelligence, not from a server farm or a dark web drop, but from a school teacher in a small town in North Carolina. Her name was Dana Whitmer, and all she did was stumble. The wrong box. On January 17, 2018, Dana was supervising student cleanup duty in the basement of Candler Middle School, an aging brick structure nestled against the Blue Ridge Mountains. The building had long been rumored to have tunnels or bomb shelters built beneath it during the Cold War, rumors most dismissed as folklore. Until that afternoon, when one of her students, Miles Renner, slipped on a loose tile near the far wall of the old boiler room. His fall cracked a piece of wood paneling, revealing something unexpected: a door. Rust-covered, sealed with rivets, and bolted from the outside. It led into a narrow stone corridor. No one had known it existed. Curious and against better judgment, Dana and the school janitor pried it open. They found stairs descending at a steep pitch. At the bottom, a wide chamber lined with fluorescent lights, all burned out. It smelled like dust and decay and something else: preservative. The walls were covered in plastic sheeting, and in the center, illuminated by the beam of Dana's phone, was a display platform made of brushed metal and plexiglass. Inside it was a mannequin, but not just any mannequin. It wore the tattered remains of real clothing, a sundress faded with age, and on the left ankle, a medical tag labeled Subject C-8-317, the Crawlspace Museum. The discovery shut down the school for 3 weeks. Federal investigators arrived within 24 hours and cordoned off the site under the guise of a structural hazard review. But what they found beneath the building shocked even the most hardened agents. There wasn't just one chamber, there were 6. Each was laid out like a gallery, complete with display pedestals, faded lighting rigs, even visitor placards, though the text was printed in a coded alphabet. Some installations were empty, dust rings marking where something had once stood. Others were not. In Chamber 2, they found a sealed tank filled with resin. Suspended inside was a taxidermied dog with human teeth glued into its mouth. Chamber 4 contained rows of Polaroids, hung from thin wires like an old laundry line. The images were faded, but many were identifiable as missing persons linked to the vanishing line. And in Chamber 6, investigators found what looked like an artist's workspace, complete with chemicals, latex molds, facial reconstruction tools, and a half-sculpted bust labeled Replica PG. Most disturbing of all, on one concrete wall in red ink, curate what they destroy, beautify what they erase. Beneath it, scrawled more crudely, the patron watched from beneath the floorboards. The Carolina Connection Forensics dated the gallery's last use to between 2009 and 2011, matching a surge in disappearances along Highway 29 during that period. Among the Polaroids was a previously unconnected case, Maya Grissom, a 16-year-old who vanished in 2010 after attending a church retreat in Charlotte. Her parents had always believed she ran away, as there were reports she had been planning to leave town with an older boyfriend. But there, in Chamber 5, pinned to the wall, was a photo of her bound in a fetal position, eyes closed, seemingly asleep. The timestamp, when decoded, read C-8/frame 317. That matched the label on the mannequin found in Chamber 1. She hadn't run away. She had been taken, and she had been framed. The mistrial in Asheville. 3 weeks after the discovery, federal authorities arrested a local man named Reed Carson, the longtime school maintenance contractor. He'd been employed there since 1998. Carson, 64, had no prior criminal record. He lived alone, didn't own a computer, and rarely left the county. His only known vice was collecting antique surgical tools, many of which were found in his garage. Agents found keys to the hidden chambers on his keyring, and in his attic, dozens of vinyl records, each in pristine condition. Many of them were recordings of interrogation room audio from notorious serial killers. When asked why he had them, Carson replied, "I like to listen to men lie." The media branded him the basement curator. But something didn't add up. Carson didn't fit the psychological profile of a curator. He lacked the ego, the artistic drive, the ideological fervor, and when pressed under polygraph, his answers showed consistency. He claimed the door had already existed when he started working there. He said he was told never to open it. He never asked who told him. He just obeyed. In his words, "I just kept the lights working and changed the air filters. That's all." There was no record of any underground maintenance budget, no reports filed, but the evidence was thin. No DNA, no digital links, no fingerprints. His trial collapsed, and the judge declared a mistrial. The gallery was sealed again, now under government control. And Reed Carson vanished 2 months later while on a supervised psychiatric release walk in Buncombe County. His body was never found. But 1 week later, a note was found tucked inside an old book of surrealist paintings in the county library. It read, "I didn't build the gallery. I just dusted the frames." The corridor map with the Candler discovery, Royce's team began revisiting older, supposedly unrelated missing persons cases, especially those located near abandoned structures or schools. It was then that an analyst named Eric Dow made a breakthrough. Using geospatial mapping software, he overlaid all known disappearances linked to vanishing line corridors onto a map of early 20th century mental institutions and Cold War fallout shelters. The overlap was staggering. More than 73% of the sites were within 1 kilometer of a former state-run facility, now defunct. The theory? The curators hadn't built new galleries. They had reclaimed them. They were parasites feeding on the bones of the past, using places the world had already chosen to forget. And that's what made them so impossible to trace. They operated in spaces that had already been erased. The anonymous leak. On April 10, 2018, Royce received an email from a burner address, nemozny@postvale.ch. No message. Just one attachment, a schematic. It was a blueprint of a facility labeled Corridor D-5, complete with room names like Preparation, Deprivation, and Gallery Proper, and scribbled in the corner, in red ink, "This one is still active." Coordinates were embedded in the file's metadata. They pointed to a forested area outside Brno, Czech Republic. Interpol, along with Czech intelligence, organized a covert entry team. They found the compound, but it had already been cleared out. Every room empty, every light smashed, every record burned. But they left one thing behind: a single photograph, taped to a white wall in the center of the main gallery. It showed a little girl in a yellow raincoat. Her eyes were closed, and beneath her image was a caption, framed, but not forgotten. No one recognized her. She wasn't in any missing persons database. To this day, she remains unidentified. The curation continues. By mid-2018, it was clear the network hadn't died. It had simply fractured. Some curators had gone to ground. Others likely continued their work under new aliases, new patrons, new corridors. But the signature remained. In October 2018, a German hiker stumbled across a locked glass box buried in a hillside along the Schwarzwald Trail. Inside, a mannequin in military fatigues posed as if in anguish. A placard beside it read, "State, War Eternal." Frame, E2019. It wasn't just art, it was statement. The curators were still watching, still framing, still preserving, and as Royce would later testify before a joint intelligence committee, the vanishing line never ended. It's not a straight road. It loops. It doubles back. And worst of all, it learns. In 2019, the investigation into the vanishing line was in a quiet tailspin. Too many suspects, too few certainties. Governments debated jurisdiction. Media attention began to drift toward more palatable crimes. Most people assumed the case had gone cold, but somewhere in the dull hum of forgotten evidence, something moved, something stirred. It began in the white noise, literally, and it ended with a name no one dared say aloud: the return of Wren. In January of that year, a former FBI cryptanalyst named Wren Hadley contacted Royce out of the blue. Wren was one of the few who'd seen the full unredacted file on the Candler Gallery before it had been sealed under the Department of Homeland Security's Special Archives designation. After her retirement in 2016, Wren had gone almost completely off-grid. No public statements, no interviews, just silence. But now, she had something. She told Royce she had been working in secret, tracking the signal. According to Wren, something had been broadcasting on low-frequency radio bands from several locations near past vanishing line sites. A signal buried so deep beneath environmental static, it could only be uncovered through something she called spectral subtractive listening, a technique that peeled back natural noise to isolate man-made anomalies. Royce didn't understand the science, but he understood the result, because Wren had compiled months' worth of signal captures, and each one repeated a single pattern: a woman's voice whispering 3 words: see, frame, become. The voice print. Wren wasn't guessing. She had matched the spectral voice print against FBI and international databases using a composite algorithm that detected tone, inflection, and linguistic irregularities. What she found horrified her. The voice matched one heard in a pirated transmission that interrupted a Boston television station's programming in 1987, a notorious incident where a masked figure interrupted late-night cable, spouting nonsense and laughing in distorted tones before the signal cut. That incident had been written off as a prank, but Wren matched not just the voice, but the background static and sound design layering. She believed that interruption hadn't been random. She believed it was the first known curation broadcast. Wren had gone back even further, finding fragments of similar signal anomalies in shortwave archives dating as far back as 1963. And the closer to known vanishing line abduction sites, the clearer the signal became. But the most damning find came from a 1999 police call in New Hampshire. where a missing teen's family reported hearing a woman's voice coming through their baby monitor. A voice that repeated a phrase in a whisper. "Framed already. You'll see." The teen, Lana Hennessy, was never found. Her photograph was discovered years later in the Candler chamber. Wren compiled a digital voice print of all incidents. She gave it a name, The Whisperer. The coded film in March 2019, Wren received an unlabeled 8mm film reel in the mail. No return address. The postmark came from Montreal. The film was titled Frame Zero. It was silent, grainy, black and white. The footage showed a single corridor, filmed from a fixed security-style angle. The walls were lined with what appeared to be wax figures or mannequins, some unfinished, some grotesquely detailed. But at exactly the 4-minute mark, the film flickered violently, and for 17 frames, just under a second, an image of a real person flashed into view. It was a teenage girl strapped to a chair, eyes fluttering as if in a daze. She looked directly at the camera, mouth open, speaking. Wren isolated the frames and enhanced the image. She ran lip-read analysis. The phrase appeared to be, "It's under the river." No context, no explanation. But Wren had a theory. The River Vault, the next major breakthrough, came not from a detective, but a librarian. In June 2019, a university archivist named Jeremy Talbot contacted Royce after discovering a series of coded entries in the footnotes of a rare architectural survey of the James River Basin, published in 1972 by a now-defunct firm called Fenn and Rowe. Each page footnote contained an out-of-place decimal sequence. Talbot, a cipher enthusiast, cross-referenced them against the Dewey Decimal System. They translated into book titles, and when he gathered them in order, their titles read, "The Hollow Earth, The Preservation Society, False Reflections, The Vanishing Point, Burial Without Death, Framing the Mind." Talbot believed it was an embedded breadcrumb trail, and when he used the book's page numbers listed in the original survey, he uncovered a geographic coordinate system, one that pointed to an abandoned flood control vault buried beneath the James River near Richmond, Virginia. Wren and Royce coordinated a search team. It was no longer a matter of if, it was a question of what was still down there. Beneath the surface, the vault was accessed via a rusted hatch half submerged in mud, hidden beneath a maintenance shack. Inside, they found a tunnel system that led to a chamber sealed with a triple-locked iron door. No one had entered in decades. When they breached it, the stench hit them first. Formaldehyde, Moldavian something else, the chemical rot of taxidermy. Inside were 8 human-sized cylinders. 7 were empty. One still held a preserved body. The figure was dressed in period clothing. A girl's 1970s Catholic school uniform, decayed almost to threads. A metal tag around her wrist read, E-1-003/Mira Jo Callahan. That name had not appeared on any missing persons list, but her face matched a girl who appeared in a background newspaper photo from 1971, standing behind her teacher at a science fair in Norfolk. A local paper had captured the moment. No one had even known she was missing, until now. The footage inside the vault. In one corner of the vault sat an old projector covered in dust. They powered it on. It began to run a looped video, grainy and silent. It showed a black room. Inside, the woman's voice played on a repeating pattern. 3 whispered words. See, frame, become. And each time the voice looped, a mannequin was replaced with a real person on the screen. Someone bound, blindfolded, unmoving. Then, with the next loop, they'd vanish again. Mannequin. Real. Mannequin. Real. The video ran for 13 minutes. By the end, Wren was shaking. She said, "This isn't just recording. It's documentation. This is proof they've found a way to blend the real with the replica. They aren't just framing lives. They're erasing the line between truth and theater." The whisperer's message days. Later, Wren received one last signal. It wasn't on radio bands. It came through her hearing aid. It activated in the middle of the night. She lived alone, and the device wasn't connected to any wireless source. She woke up to the sound of static buzzing in her head. Then the voice whispered, "Stop framing the frame." She tore the hearing aid out, but it kept buzzing on her nightstand. The next morning, she sent Royce her findings. That was the last time anyone heard from Wren Hadley. Her apartment was found empty. No signs of struggle. Her files? Gone. Only one thing remained. A sticky note taped to her refrigerator that read, "What we watch also watches back." The Whisperer's Network. Royce came to believe that the Whisperer was not a single entity, but a network of female curators operating through psychoacoustic conditioning. Their goal? To embed the idea of disappearance into people's minds before they even vanished. A form of thematic abduction, where the victim, already conditioned to believe they were going to disappear, became easier to isolate, manipulate, and finally frame. The voice didn't lure them. It primed them. The galleries were not created after the disappearances. The disappearances existed to feed the galleries. The curation wasn't just physical, it was conceptual. The public never knew. The events of 2019 were buried under red tape and classified under U.S. Special Projects Directive 93A. No press releases, no public warnings, just silence. But in small pockets of online forums, the whispers continued. People posted about hearing voices in the static of old radios, about mannequins that changed position overnight, about dreams of being watched from a room they'd never seen. And every now and then, someone would post a strange phrase, always with the same 3 words: see, frame, become. Royce was no stranger to conspiracy theories. He had cataloged his fair share of dead-end leads, cryptic messages, and armchair detective manifestos. Most went nowhere. Some were clever. Others were deeply unsettling. But none had ever felt like this. Because after Wren Hadley's disappearance, on the walls hung photos, each of a person mid-sentence, mouth open, eyes wide in surprise or fear. Each image appeared to be taken the moment before abduction. On a long desk sat hundreds of catalog cards, identical to those on the microfiche, and in the center, under glass, a mannequin dressed in a librarian's cardigan, glasses perched on her nose, mouth frozen mid-speech. The placard at her feet read, "Margaret E. Shaw, Class 2, Final Archive Status Curated." Royce couldn't look away. She had become part of the collection, a living woman, now preserved, posed, and remembered by no one but her captors. The archivist's code. Using the catalog codes, Royce cross-referenced dates, locations, and names, building a pattern map of all recorded Highway 29 disappearances. That's when he realized. They followed a pattern of lunar cycles, specifically new moons that fell on dates corresponding to prime numerical sequences. Each disappearance wasn't random. It was scheduled, planned, curated. And they followed a formula. New moon night, numerical palindrome date, victim profile. Ages 15 to 28. Recent emotional trauma. Social disconnection. Signal contact within 48 hours of disappearance. TV static, radio anomaly, electronic voice. Final location. Within 3 miles of a river or former rail line, the formula fit 73 out of 76 known disappearances. And each of those victims appeared in the archive records. They were chosen, marked, framed, and ultimately subtracted. Royce's breaking point. At this point, Royce began seeing things. He'd catch a flicker of a mannequin in his peripheral vision, or hear faint whispers in his phone even when it was powered off. He was certain it wasn't paranoia. The deeper he went, the more real it became. His home was broken into, But nothing was stolen, just rearranged. Photos flipped upside down, notes slightly rewritten. One morning, he awoke to find his own face on one of the archive cards, printed on his printer overnight. It read, Royce D. Tanner status, pre-curation progress, 72%. That same night, he received a call from a number with all zeros. He answered. The voice said, You have seen, you have framed, you are becoming. Then it hung up. Unanswered questions. With Royce's mind unraveling and his sources gone, he decided to release a version of his findings as a podcast. He left out the most dangerous parts: the archive locations, the voice print data, the names of the living curators. But even then, he received death threats and warnings. One message stood out. You think this is about disappearance. It isn't. It's about preservation through replication. The original always rots, but the frame endures. A week later, his podcast feed was hacked. The last 5 episodes replaced by white noise, except at the very end, for 2 seconds, the whisperer's voice. See, frame, become. The radio went silent at 3:17 a.m. Listeners from Lynchburg to Charlottesville called into their local station, RVN 88.4, reporting a chilling anomaly. The station wasn't playing its usual late-night jazz program. Instead, a low hum echoed through the airwaves, like a signal beacon. Then, a whisper. Not in English, not in any language anyone recognized. Then static. This lasted for 7 minutes and 29 seconds. 7:29. Highway 29. To the average listener, it may have seemed like a broadcast malfunction, an oddity to laugh off the next morning. But to Royce Tanner, it wasn't just another data point. It was a summoning, and it meant only one thing. They were active again. The signal loop Royce scrambled to access an archived recording of the transmission, already flagged and pulled offline by the FCC, but he wasn't alone in his hunt. A hacker known as Echo 13, an anonymous signal archaeologist, posted the complete audio to a deep web server titled The Ether Vault. The file was labeled framecycle_729.wv. Royce downloaded it, analyzing the waveform with forensic software. Hidden within the low hum were embedded sonic markers, high-frequency blips that, when isolated, formed a coordinate map. Each blip corresponded to a real-world location, one after another, all following the same route, Highway 29. The final marker pulsed near an abandoned radio transmission tower in Madison Heights. It had been decommissioned since 1994. But when Royce arrived, he found a fresh set of tire tracks in the gravel. Someone else had been there. And what he discovered inside confirmed his worst fear: the control room. The tower's interior was a time capsule. Rusty dials, dead wires, paper coffee cups fossilized in dust. But deeper inside, the control room still had power, and it had been modified. One wall was covered in Polaroid photos, hundreds of them, each showing a person, some crying, some frozen in expressions of awe, some blurred as if they had been moving mid-frame, all tagged with the same red number, Frame ID. Beneath the photos were reels of magnetic tape, each labeled with combinations like F14 AH29 WREN, Ren Hadley, the missing documentarian. Royce's pulse thudded in his ears. Someone had captured and cataloged her frame. And then, something made him stop breathing. Pinned to the center of the wall, a single photo, his own face, taken from behind as he stood over his desk, time-stamped 4:12 a.m., 3 days ago. Frame ID, RDT_001. Beneath it, written in thick black marker, curation scheduled. Royce's descent. Royce knew he had crossed a line, no longer the investigator, but the observed. He abandoned his apartment, cut all digital ties, and went completely analog. Spiral notebooks, payphones, disposable cameras. He lived in motels, sleeping during the day and driving at night. Each stop along Highway 29 revealed new signs of the framekeepers, the unknown group behind the disappearances. In Ruckersville, he found an old VHS rental shop. Taped to the back of a shelf was a note. The ones who vanish are not taken. They are chosen. What you are seeing is not new, only remembered. In Culpeper, a retired sheriff whispered to him over coffee. They call it dead air, 'cause it's the only time you can't be heard screaming. In Danville, an elderly woman named Elise pointed him to an abandoned house where her daughter had vanished in 1981. On the wall inside, scrawled in lipstick, "I am not missing. I am hanging in the Hall of Silence." Echo 13's reveal echo. 13 finally contacted Royce directly through a burner phone drop. They met in the parking lot of a shuttered diner in Farmville. Echo was a woman, mid-30s, confident, dressed like someone used to being invisible in a crowd. She slid Royce a hard drive and said, "This is everything. What they're doing isn't magic. It's worse. It's archival terrorism. They're preserving trauma like it's art, broadcasting it on frequencies we don't hear consciously. And once you've been cataloged, they can replace you." Royce asked, "Replace?" She nodded. "A frame is a shell, a replica. You go in, and something that acts like you comes out. Your mom, your friends, they don't notice. But your dog won't go near you. Mirrors distort. And the real you? You're trapped in the static." She called it the mirror loop. Each victim wasn't just disappearing. They were being recorded, and then repeated by an artificial identity engineered to behave like them. "Like a haunted painting," she said, "but one that moves." The theory: echo bodies. Echo 13's files contained case studies, photos, logs, even CCTV clips of people who had gone missing, then reappeared months later. Subtly wrong. One young woman, Carly L., vanished in 2003. She reappeared at her mother's house in 2005. Same voice, same face, but she never blinked, didn't recognize childhood photos, and she called her mother by her first name. When pressed, Carly began repeating phrases. "This is the moment we frame. This is the moment we frame." Echo 13 believed these were echo bodies, frames embedded with pre-recorded behavioral patterns, deployed back into the world to replace the originals and mask the disappearances. "The dead aren't buried," Echo 13 whispered. "They're looped, again and again, on a reel none of us can see." Royce asked where the real ones went. Echo looked away. "Where all forgotten memories go." The broadcasting ritual. At the heart of it all was the broadcast. The framekeepers used specific high-frequency transmissions, inaudible to most ears, to trigger shifts in perception. Royce pieced together evidence that during every confirmed disappearance, a transmission aired. A power anomaly was reported in the area. Animals in the vicinity acted erratically, and sometimes an unexplained fog rolled in. Echo 13 called it the curator's veil. "Once the broadcast hits," she explained, "the world you know breaks. You step into a version of reality filtered through your frame, and once you're in the frame, you can't get out." Royce remembered Wren's final audio log, where she whispered, "I think I'm still here, but everything looks drawn, like it's been traced." It wasn't poetic metaphor. She had been caught in a frame. The children who remembered. In his search, Royce discovered a pattern of young children who had, for a brief time, remembered the people who vanished. One boy, age 6, claimed his babysitter still read him stories every night from under the floorboards. Another girl swore her cousin talked through the shadows and lived in the static behind her cartoon shows. A group of children at a summer camp near Scottsville all drew the same thing one night during lights out. A house with no doors, filled with mirrors, where the quiet people hung in frames. Each child called the same thing the frame room. Royce realized the memories weren't gone. They were echoing through minds still porous enough to hear. Only the very young could sense the overlap. Everyone else? We just called it grief, a signal of his own. Royce made a choice. He would fight back. He knew he couldn't outpower the frame keepers, but he could embed a message of his own, something to disrupt the signal chain. He returned to the radio tower and used the remaining equipment to record a loop of his own voice layered with counter frequencies designed to jam the curation process. This is Royce D. Tanner. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. Frame is fiction. Memory is resistance. He set it on an endless loop and activated a transmitter. Echo 13 helped him rig using scavenged broadcast hardware. He called it the memory pulse. Then he disappeared. Gone, but not missing. A month passed. Royce's podcast went silent. His website redirected to a blank page with a single line of text. All frames eventually crack. Echo 13 tried to contact him, but got no response. Then, one night, on WRVN 88.4, a familiar voice returned. A single sentence, distorted but unmistakably Royce's. If you're hearing this, I'm still in here. Then, static and silence. The door wasn't there before. Echo 13 stood alone at the base of the Wren broadcast tower, staring at the rusted service entrance. Except now, beside it, a second door had appeared, unmarked, seamless, smooth as bone. It hadn't been there when she and Royce first broke in, and now it pulsed. The surface shimmered faintly under the moonlight, like heat waves rising from asphalt. When she placed her hand on it, a low vibration thrummed beneath her palm, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. She whispered, "Royce?" No answer. But she knew. He was inside, and so was the frame room. The lost children's drawings. In the days following Royce's disappearance, Echo 13 dove deeper into their case files. She returned to the summer camp in Scottsville where the children had drawn the eerily identical pictures. Doorless houses, rooms of mirrors, and framed people watching them from behind reflective glass. She bribed the camp's janitor to access the art supply closet, where they kept archived camper materials. She found them, the drawings. Most had faded, but one stood out. A house in the center. Framed figures looking outward from windows. A girl, stick figure style, standing at the front, scribbled in red crayon. Above her, the name Wren in a child's clumsy handwriting. And below, in black marker, added later, "She told me not to forget. She told me where he is." Echo's breath caught. Wren Hadley, the documentarian who vanished in 2016. She hadn't been silenced. She'd found a way to reach the children. And if she could, maybe Royce could too. Echo 13 enters the door at the Wren Tower, opened without a sound. No hinges, no creak, just a silent glide inward. Inside was darkness, not the dusty remnants of a decommissioned station, but a space that felt detached from time, like walking into a memory. She stepped through and was swallowed whole. Then light. A corridor stretched ahead, lined with mirrors, but they didn't reflect her. Instead, each one displayed a moment, people laughing, crying, screaming, praying. Some froze in mid-action, others looped like corrupted GIFs. Every few feet, the hallway trembled and the images shifted. Some faces she recognized. Carly L., the girl who came back wrong. Wren Hadley, facing a camcorder, eyes sunken but alert. And then, Royce. His face twisted in confusion as he stared at a mirror. Behind him, a door slowly opened. Echo 13 reached for the glass, but it wasn't solid. Her hand passed through and she fell forward, into the memory. Royce inside the loop. Royce had been trapped for 5 days, or so he thought. Time bent inside the frame room. One moment it was morning, the next, dusk. He could feel hunger but never starve, grow tired but never sleep. He wandered through identical hallways, always ending up in the same room, a chamber with 32 mirrors and one blank frame. Each mirror showed someone different, frozen in a moment of personal terror. He came to know them, gave them names, assigned them stories. He wasn't sure if the stories were his invention or theirs bleeding into him. The worst part? Sometimes the blank frame would shimmer, and for a few seconds, his own reflection would appear, mouth silently screaming. Each time it held up a different number of fingers. 5, 4, 3, a countdown. And Royce feared what came after 0. Reunion, when Echo 13 stumbled into the room, Royce didn't believe she was real. "Echo," he whispered. Are you part of it?" She reached forward, grabbed his hand, and it felt warm, solid, real. That was all the proof he needed. He choked out a laugh. "You found it."